Hello, everyone. Welcome to READ437, Principles and Practices of Language and Literacy Assessment. This is Brad. For most of you should be familiar with this voice by now. For those of you who are new, welcome. We occasionally do screencasts as follows, so as a sort of flipped approach to this course as we did in 436, but you also notice some different approaches as well because the content has shifted as well as the principal assessments for this course, but I'll get into that another time. Here I want to talk a bit about the course as a whole, and I also want to set you up for your first assignment. So to get us started, why don't we sort of frame really what this first week is about, which is what is the purpose of literacy assessment? I'm going to have a pregnant pause here and think to yourself for a minute about why do we do literacy assessment, as obvious as that question is. Now, there's a myriad of ways people answer this question. You're going to read two pieces this week, the Lipson et al. And the Johnson piece that are going to have some ideas. But I actually wanted to zoom ahead and just sort of look at the way what the text that's going to guide us during the second half of the course, the qualitative reading inventory, says is the purpose of literacy assessment, and then particularly giving the QRI itself. And so if you look at this list here, which is very much about monitoring and assessing instructional level, to what extent does this represent your ideas about why we do literacy assessment? So one of the things that you might have noticed in the syllabus is that one of the key learning objectives, ideas of the course was to frame assessment as a way to not simply just measure student learning, but also to be thinking about this continual improvement of it. And so when you see RTI here, you see things here around doing diagnoses as well as individualizing instruction. I think that all lends to this idea that we assess not simply in the summative sense, but also in the formative sense. And we'll talk more about formative and summative assessment as we get into thinking more specifically about assessments that actually address students' cognitive abilities. Given that, I actually want to make sure that we're clear on the connections to the course. In this revision of the reading program that we're doing here, and this is a new version of this class itself, first time we're teaching it, we're trying to align with the International Reading Association, now the International Literacy Association standards for reading specialists. And you can see here for this course, we're really focused on IRA Standard 3, which is really around assessments, clearly, obviously, around developing them, utilizing them, and then leveraging them in a variety of ways, which you'll see in the main performance tasks for the course. So most of you were with me in 436, so I want to make the obvious comparisons between the two because they're very different courses. In 436, we were about the foundational knowledge of literacy and language, and we spent a lot of time in readings around the theory behind it, and the key work of the class is around doing academic research of our own, both in the literature base and in our own classrooms. 437 is much more about practitioner knowledge and much more about utilizing assessments in order to better understand and enhance student learning. So we're going to do readings around the issues and administering the literacy assessments. And really the work is going to be around administering the literacy assessments and writing, analyzing data and reporting on them. So that means with the classroom readings are going to be different and then the activities are going to be different. Last semester I had you in groups. This semester you're going to be working primarily with just a partner or someone who's in the same or similar grade level as you, giving feedback and talking through some of the issues of implementing in class. I'm also hoping to do a whole group conversation via the town hall feature on Blackboard, but we're going to see what we can do about finding 45 minutes every other week to do so, but more on that in a bit. So the course is organized in two halves. The first half is really about whole class group assessments, and this is largely by practical design. I wanted to make sure we eased into operationalizing individualized assessments. I wanted to give you some time to set that up to work with an individual student more deliberately, and many of you already do, of course. But I wanted to make sure that you had some heads up, whereas in the first half of the semester, the whole group ones should align relatively well with work you're already doing. And there's some freedom here to pick things that align with what you're doing. So when we do the writing assessment as the second assessment, I'm going to give you quite a bit of latitude to select something that's curriculum based already in the work you're doing. And that means you don't really want to have to shift your schedule. You may have to make some small adjustments in the second half in order to attend to the instruments we'll be using. So the first half again is teacher derived instruments. We're gonna do except for this motivation survey, which we're gonna do first. I'll get to that in a second. But we're gonna do a writing assessment, and we're gonna also do a interactive read aloud or a guided reading assessment of your choice with your texts. And we're going to culminate that in a professional development or teacher team session based on your cohort data. So you'll not only do the reporting, but you'll also put together a plan to share your findings and the implications with your colleagues at your school. And we'll talk a bit more about that as the semester goes on. In the second half, we're going to be using the running records and qualitative reading inventories to build a case study. So these are really individualized assessments. You'll be focusing on one student, and these assessments are already built. So you're buying the books include these assessments, and there's a wide range of them based on grade level. So don't forget the Clay book running records for teachers, as well as the Caldwell and Leslie book qualitative reading inventory volume 5. We won't need those until March, so you have some time here. And again, I would encourage you to buy used rather than new. Save yourself a few dollars. That is going to culminate in a case study. So you'll be focusing on an individual student, and you'll be synthesizing multiple pieces of data and providing a report on the student's understanding as well as plans for individualized interventions. Okay, a couple of key notes here. 85% of your grade is based on individual fieldwork and reporting. This is all about your work in your classroom and the responses you're going to write as a result of this. There will be feedback loops. There'll be a lot of individual back and forth between you and I because I'll be reading your stuff quite often. So you'll always have a chance to revise, of course, but just keep in mind here, this is really based on your individual writing work. I wanted to remind you that we're going to be focusing on class, but I want you to make sure that you're constantly saving your data. And we'll talk about ways to do that as we go along, because you may end up using the data you collected from an individual student during the first half of class and the latter half of class. And the final piece is, this is a class that's connected to the clinic hours that are required in order to get the master's degree. You might recall hearing that you needed, I think it's roughly 250. And those clinic hours are, of course, your classroom, the work you're doing. It's just hours dedicated to this class. So this class expects 25 hours. That's 2 hours a week. Now, of course, as we move further in, it's going to be more for that. But the clinic hours obviously be administering the assessments and analyzing the data. So you're thinking about work you would already be doing anyways, but now formalized for this class. And the form is on the last page of the syllabus. It's self-explanatory. You'll just record your days and your hours and the work you did. You'll turn that into me at the end of the semester, and I will submit it to the powers that be at Roosevelt. Okay, so the first assessment we're doing is a motivation assessment. The Malloy piece that you're going to read this week is not only about motivation assessment, but is the motivation assessment. You're going to see that inside the text is the assessment, and I've created a Microsoft Word document for you to modify that's on the Blackboard site on this. But just to get a sense of why we would do this, I want you to read this quote from that text. So maybe wondering why we're starting here, for a couple of reasons. One is it's a non-cognitive assessment. That makes it a little bit easier for us to sort of dive into thinking about literacy assessment and thinking about analyzing data. Uh, and it's also, I think, reflective of the kind of thinking we're doing here. It's about how do we utilize these assessments to tailor instruction to enhance engagement and student achievement. So this is an easy way to do so and won't require significant instructional time and or load on you to think about the meaning behind it. So basically what we're going to be doing is you're going to be charged with administering the assessments to a whole class or a large group. So if you are working with you can choose a cohort within that, or you can do the whole class. I would recommend a whole class if you have it. I think you need to do at least 10 students. From that, you're going to gather that data, you're going to analyze the data to determine patterns and trends. Inside the Malloy piece, we'll talk about this next week too, you'll see that there's a way to score and analyze the data. So we'll follow the text because it gives us a really clear idea how to do it. And then your report is going to be on the findings that you've discovered and the implications for future instruction. And you can find on page 8 of the syllabus the template form for doing the reporting. But again, we'll get to that next week. Okay, so what are you going to be doing by February 15th, next Monday? Make sure you review the syllabus. You definitely check out those forms too. I've mentioned them a couple times. Complete the survey. The link is on the Blackboard site as well as in your email. There's 3 readings, Johnston and Lipson. They're both very short. They're both kind of underlying about the purposes of why we do assessment. The Johnston piece is around thinking around the teacher as a sort of an evaluation expert, and Lipson is around making decisions for RTI. The Malloy piece is really about the assessment and the actual assessment itself, which I've pulled out for you in a separate document. And what you're going to do is once you finish the survey, I'm going to use the survey to assign you a partner. And you and your partner are going to connect. I'll shoot you both an email later this week, and I want you to take a look at the assessment and decide whether you need to make any changes to the language based on your student population, and then also decide on how you want to administer the survey. For instance, you'll have to make the choice about whether it's most appropriate to give the survey as a handout for students to complete individually, or whether it's better to administer orally, or whether you need to meet in small groups or one-to-one in order to deliver it. That's a decision I'll leave to you, and that's something you make sure you'll want to report about. And then you also want to determine when you'll deliver the motivation assessment. I'd like you to wait till mid next week at the earliest, so like Wednesday, Thursday of next week. But try to figure out, you're going to probably need, there's 20 questions on it. They usually take about 30 seconds each to complete max. They're very easy. But you're going to need about, I would say 20 minutes total to deliver it in your class. So figure out when you want to give the assessment as well. Next week, just to give you an overview, we're going to look more closely at motivation. So we'll do some readings on it just to sort of ground you in its relationship to reading proficiency. I'm hoping later next week we can find time as a whole group to discuss motivation as well as the Johnston-Lipson pieces around purposes for literacy assessment. And then we're also going to talk a bit about analyzing this assessment data and troubleshooting some initial efforts around that. So there'll be more about the actual specifics of the motivation assessment assignment because that'll be due essentially 2 weeks from Friday. If you have any questions, give me a holler, and welcome to 437.